everyone. Welcome to the Community Church online experience. We are so excited that you're here with us today. Hey, if this is your first time, do us a favor and comment where you're watching from. Look, our heart is to be real with everyone, live differently in our community, and offer the hope of the gospel. We hope you enjoy today's conversation.
We're back.
Already said it.
Oh, man.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Community Church online experience. We're so excited that you're here with us today. I have with me the better half of the two of us, the better half of this church leadership. I'll say that. With us is my wife, Grace. I'm really excited that she's here with us. We're talking about the message. We're finishing up the series, Yes, You. And last week we talked with Pastor Eric, and man, it was so good. It was so good. And I'm glad to just be back. I'm glad to be back doing our online experience. So I'm excited.
We love a podcast.
We love a podcast. You and I listen to a bunch of podcasts. Lots. Like it a lot. But so today we're gonna finish up the series that we're doing. We started a series a couple weeks ago called Yes You, and we're talking about purpose. We're talking about God's purpose and like our place in it. In week 1 we talked about King David. Mm-hmm. In week 2 we talked about Rahab, and then this week we're talking about Gideon. And what I love about all three of those characters is that they're so flawed.
Yeah.
All of them in their own way, right? So like King David was a murderer, he was an adulterer, all the things the basics. Rahab was a prostitute, right? Like those are two people that most people would go, if I were choosing someone to carry out God's plan, it probably wouldn't be them.
Exactly.
Right? But God still used them. And then the third person that we're going to talk about today is Gideon. And Gideon you love Gideon? Why do you love Gideon?
I think just because of that. He's so flawed.
Yeah.
He is not courageous.
No.
He is scared and hiding, and God found him where he was.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Him. And I love that. And I know we're going to talk about it, but I think it's just when you're in the depths of your worst moments, mm-hmm. God can bring you out and use you to do something amazing.
So true.
And
it's so true. And I think with Gideon, the whole story is so fascinating in itself, but to be able to see where he started and the things. So like, I think that if there was one word that you could use for Gideon's story, like the way that he started was probably insecurity, right?
Yeah,
so
for
like
sure.
He was super insecure. He mentioned it when he was talking to the angel.
Yeah,
so
he's
like
the least
in the tribe, least in the family. And actually where the angel found him was in the lowest point of like where they were in the wine press, right?
Right.
And the Bible describes Gideon was down in a wine press separating the wheat from the chaff, and
which is not where you were supposed to do it, right?
No. So like in the process of separating wheat from chaff, so the whole process is like you grab the wheat like in its whole form, and it's inside this little casing, which is the chaff. Right. And what you do is you roll a big rock on it, and it cracks the chaff. Mm-hmm. And the purpose of like separating it was like the way that you do it was you throw up, you have a little basket and you throw up the wheat and the chaff, and it's cracked. And when you throw it up, the chaff is lighter than the grain, and the grain falls into your basket, and the chaff is taken away by the wind.
Right.
Well, he was in the bottom of a wine press where there is no wind.
Can't even do that.
There's no wind, and it was a picture of cowardice, right? Like he was hiding. He was hiding.
He still needed his bread.
We all need our bread. If I'm being real honest,
sourdough is rough. That's a whole nother
God,
level.
that's a different
He still
story.
needed his bread, but he was going to hide
to
do it.
And the reason was because the Midianites, that was who they were facing at the time. And the Midianites were a strong army. They actually invented camel warfare. Did you know that?
Never in my life have I heard that.
Now you know.
I
ding,
don't
ding, ding.
even know if I could tell you what camel warfare is.
You dream up in your imagination what camel warfare is, and the Midianites were better.
Because
in battle, like you want the height advantage.
Yeah.
And so, like, before
seem uncomfortable.
They probably are. I've never ridden a camel, so I couldn't tell you.
I'm just wondering, with all of the Bible cartoons I've seen in my life, why camel warfare was never a part of that.
I agree. That's a good question.
Seems like a missed opportunity.
That's a big missed opportunity.
Come on, VeggieTales, where you at?
God, yeah, but what vegetable would be a camel? Got her.
A broccoli with two.
No, they already have a little boy broccoli.
I know they do.
Okay. So the Midianites,
Wait,
they were,
hold on.
let's get back on topic, babe. Cut it out. Shut it down.
Okay.
So so the Midianites were the super strong. They were who were oppressing the Israelites.
Right.
That's who was oppressing them. And they had an army of about 135,000 people, which was a fairly large
big
army because the Israelites were like, the Midianites came and destroyed them
Right.
because God, in fact, we find the Israelites in this season in what's like what we call a sin cycle, where they were rescued out of Israel was rescued out of the hands of Egypt. They were brought into the wilderness. Then they made it to the promised
Right.
land. But God said, every time, or as long as you're still worshiping me, as long as you're still honoring my laws, and as long as you're still honoring me, I'll protect you.
Yeah.
Well, like humans, they fell away from God, like most of us do, right? And what God would do is God would send judges, and not judges like we think, like with the robes and the gavel.
Right.
These were warriors. Like
Right.
these were people that could lead armies. And during this time, they didn't really have a judge, so they cried out to God. God were oppressed again, and God's like, "Well, you did it," which I find fascinating too, because like most of the time we blame God for the situations that we're in, when if we're really honest with them, we get in those situations on our own.
Yeah.
Right? So like we get upset, God, why are we in such financial problems? Well, it's because we're spending money on things that we probably shouldn't spend. God, why are we dealing with our weight? Well, it's because we can't put down the daggum Little Debbie's and fast food, right? So like we get ourselves in that position, but we always blame God like it's God's fault. Like God didn't put that Little Debbie in my mouth.
Yikes.
I
That's a
did.
real life scenario. Okay. What had the Israelites done that was causing them to be in this position?
Right. So what happened was Israel's team seemed to do this a whole lot, but as they were surrounded by all the people that were not God's people,
Right.
what ended up happening was they would see these other nations and they would want what they had.
Ooh.
Right? We're gonna get in it. But what they would do is they would see the gods that they would worship.
Yeah.
And maybe they were successful in like a certain little spot, and they were like, "Oh, I want to worship that god because I want what they have." What they worshipped back then were little figurines, right? Or the sun or whatever. What we worship now instead of God is our social media, or maybe even our finances, or our job, or maybe a relationship.
Right.
That's what we put in front of God.
So we're seeing what other people have, and it's maybe distracting us.
Yeah.
And causing us to want.
Yeah. And put things in the place of God that God's only supposed to be. So when we start seeing blessings, or when we start believing that we deserve blessings, but we still are putting things above God, we can't blame God for not giving us the blessings we want, because we're not serving the God that we need to be serving to get the blessings.
I think also it's like, what are we even calculating as a blessing?
Exactly.
Because, you hear, like, if you're a parent, you hear kids say, well, that's not fair.
Right.
And in reality, what is fair? We all deserve death. Like,
That's
none
exactly
of us
right.
have earned
That's exactly
any
right.
kind of blessing.
Right.
Like, eternal life is our blessing that we've earned. So I think it's a matter of how we view what other people have as well. Like, that may be what we consider a blessing, and to them it actually could be a curse.
And there's a lot of gospels. I say gospels. There's a lot of theology right now out there that harp on the blessings, right?
Yeah.
They just harp on it. Well, God wants these blessings for you. That I think there's a part of that that's true, but I think if we focus so much on the blessings that we forget about the God who sent them, then we're setting ourselves up for expectations that are going to get us failure, right? So like if we're only serving God because of what we can get out of him,
right,
then he's not God, he's your genie.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we talk about all the time, like living open-handed.
Yeah.
If God puts something in your hands, great. If he takes it out of your hands, he's still God.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And it's that concept of what Jesus said in the garden, right?
If
God,
it's your will.
take this cup from me. Like please take this away from me. but ultimately it's your will be done,
Right.
and I will serve your will.
Right.
And we have to sometimes get out of our own way to be able to accomplish the will of God, because we're human, so we have desires. But being a Christian means we're saying no to those desires and saying yes to the will of God. And the will of God doesn't always seem intellectually like the best decision.
Oh, for sure.
But what we're learning right now while we're walking through freedom, right, is aligning and putting the right spiritual order in our lives,
Right.
to make sure that our spirit is the number one thing, then our soul, then our body, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so aligning those things in the right way to make sure that we're making decisions based on eternity,
Yeah.
not based on what we can feel comfortable with right now.
Exactly.
And so that's where we find the Israelites. So the Israelites were in this human season of uncomfortable, but it's because of the mistakes that they made by wanting these other gods. They started serving other gods. So God just removed his hand of protection. And when God removes his hand of protection, we're exposed to the things that can hurt us real bad. And so that's
So
where
the Israelites were being oppressed by the Midianites.
Yeah.
Gideon is trying to deal with the wheat in a wine press.
Yeah,
all kinds
right.
of confused.
The wrong place, doing the wrong thing in the wrong place. Yet what I love about that is that God can still meet us in the wrong place, doing the wrong thing, to be able to set us up for his purpose.
Right. So the angel appears to him, finds him in the wine press.
And this is what he tells him. So we're going to read from Judges chapter 6, verses 11 through 16. So we'll start off in verse 11. It says, "And the angel of the Lord came and sat beneath the great tree at Ophrah." I always want to say Oprah. Like I
knew it. I know.
I just want to take the H out. Why can't so?
The Bible came first.
Which belonged to Joash of the clan of Abiezer. Gideon, the son of Joash, was threshing wheat at the bottom of the winepress to hide the grain from the Midianites. So we're introduced to Gideon, who's the protagonist. The Midianites were the antagonists.
Right.
And so we're going to keep on reading in verse 12. It says, the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "Mighty hero, the Lord is with you," which I find so fascinating.
That's really the part that I love about it.
So do I.
He's hiding, scared, trying to keep his little wheat.
He's a coward.
He just wants to make his bread in peace.
Yep.
Doesn't want anybody to steal his wheat.
Yeah.
And
Don't want anybody stealing wheat.
Don't steal my wheat. And the angel is calling him mighty
hero.
And it's
mighty
like,
hero.
That is not who you see with your human eyes.
But what I love about that is that even though Gideon believed that he was a coward and he was the least, God didn't speak to his insecurity.
Nope.
God didn't speak to his past. He spoke to who he could be.
Yeah, what he had called him to be.
Right. And I think that's what God does for all of us if we listen the right way. Like I've got insecurities. I know my insecurities, but the fact that God speaks to the fact that I'm more than a conqueror, that I can accomplish all things in him, like that is what I love about my relationship with God, is that I can be who God says I am regardless of what I believe I am, you know?
It's all about that perspective.
Right. And it's just believing what God says in his
Right.
word, not what I believe about myself. So verse 13 says, "Sir," Gideon replied, "if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us?" God, Gideon annoys me at this point, okay?
He's just complaining.
Right, just complaining. "Why has all this happened to us? And where are all the miracles that our ancestors told us about?" I don't know if that's how he sounds. That's probably not how he sounds. But he's just complaining, right?
I also like that
annoying.
he's seeing an angel, and instead of being like, "Oh my goodness, why are you here talking to me?"
He's just complaining.
He's like, "Let me list the things I'm mad about."
Right.
This is why I'm in a wine press.
Right.
Because you forgot about us. Where's the God? And it's like, you're talking to an angel.
And so
What's
this
wrong
next
with you?
the next part of this verse, he even says, like, he's complaining about God to an angel of the Lord. He says, didn't they say, talking about his ancestors, didn't they say the Lord brought us up out of Egypt, but now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over to the Midianites? Verse 14, "Then the Lord turned to him and said, go with the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you." And what I love is that he didn't even address.
He just ignored it.
He just
I know.
ignored his complaint and said, okay, enough of that. I've had enough out of you. Like, that's how I feel.
I just think God is so gracious.
Yes.
Because there are days, weeks, you could say, months or years.
Yep.
Where you just kind of are sick of where you're at and you're complaining and you're like, "God, why? This makes no sense. Why have you abandoned me here?" And it's like, he can handle it,
Yeah, it's true.
you know? And he's like, all right, you done? Now go do what I've called you to do.
Right. And that's such a cool picture of God too, that even in our complaining, he still believes
He's
the
still a
best.
safe place.
He's still a safe place.
Yeah.
He's still, but he just doesn't even address
No.
it. He just doesn't even address
Moving
it.
on.
Moving
Let's go.
on. But it's a perspective shift where God, these are my problems. And God says, don't worry about your problems. Focus on me and I'll handle all of that.
Right. I mean, it's the whole thing about like, when you've got the tunnel vision on your problems, you can't even see what's in front of you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So God always asks us to have a bigger perspective,
Right.
and I love that. So verse 15 says, but Lord, Gideon replied, how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I'm the least in my entire family. And again, the Lord kind of ignores him. He says, the verse 16, the Lord said to him, I will be with you, and you will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man. And I think that's such a beautiful picture of what God really wants from us, is that we are called to do great things. We have a purpose in this world. We have a destiny. God's called us. But we can get so stuck in our own ways and our own circumstances and our own problems that we can't even see the big picture. Yet God is always trying to get us to see the bigger part. And so the next thing that happens with this story is God asks Gideon to go round up the troops. Okay, so now you have to understand too is that the Midianites have been keeping these people oppressed.
Right.
So like their military is struggling, right? In fact, a lot of scholars believe that there was actually no military. Israel didn't even have a military. It was just a bunch of ragtag farmers and like people selling stuff. Like it was just normal people. And God tells him, go round up the men and see if you can put together an army.
Right.
So he does. He goes to the people of Israel, finds 32,000 men.
Which in itself seems like a miracle.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
32,000 men to say, okay, I don't really want to go, but I'm going to go because I feel like this is what we're supposed to do. And so against the Midianites, 135,000 troops, there's 32,000. That's a 4-to-1 ratio.
Which still need God to make that work.
Definitely.
Because
That's not good odds, right? So then God says, you know what? I don't like these numbers. And I'm sure Gideon was like, all right, God.
I don't like them either.
I'm glad you said something because I don't like them either. We should probably do something about this.
This math ain't mathing. Let's
Right,
go.
this math ain't mathing. And God said, yeah, so that's too many. It's like, I'm sorry, God, what? God says, yeah, that's too many. This is what I want you to do. Go back to the men and say, hey, look, I know you probably don't really want to be here, so no judgment. No judgment here. If you want to go home, you can go home, and it's completely okay. 22,000 men left. So from 32,000 to 10,000, just because they were like, yeah, I don't want to do this. So God was like, okay, I'm liking this a whole lot better, but I still don't like these odds. So right there, that's a 14-to-1 ratio. That's rough.
Going the wrong direction.
Going the wrong direction. So God says, I still don't like these numbers. So this is what I want you to do. Take all of these dudes, take all of them, take them down to a spring and have them drink some water. And I want you to watch how they drink. If they kneel down and slurp up that water with their mouth straight from the stream, I want you to send them home. If you see somebody like cupping it and bringing it to their face, they're ready for battle. So you choose them. I'm sure Gideon was like, God, now for real, like,
You're Gideon voices.
all right,
Something.
something's going on here. Why are you doing this to me? And so they did it, and all the men that like slurped it up from the ground, Gideon told them, y'all just go home. Only 300 men were left.
Whoa.
Hold up, I did the numbers. Where's it at? That's a 450-to-1 ratio. There are 450 Midianites to 1 Israelite.
I don't really know how betting odds work, but that feels like
You could
big
make
spread.
that would have been
Big
a big win right there if you'd have put money on them.
But can I just say something about the first group that left?
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Can you imagine? We know how the story ends. We're
Right.
going to get there. Can you imagine, though, being scared and leaving
Yeah.
and missing out?
I agree.
Like letting that insecurity of like, this is scary. This is too much.
Yeah.
I'm not brave enough to do it.
Yeah.
And missing out on the promise.
Yep.
That in itself.
There's a lot that goes into that, man.
And then you have the slurpers,
right,
which just shows don't slurp. God may not use you. No,
that's
I'm just kidding.
the lesson that you got from that.
The slurpers. The whole point of that, I believe, was like had to do with their awareness and being prepared for battle. Right. So the ones that cupped it, they were aware, they were looking around.
Yeah.
And again, like, are we focused on our own stuff or focused on things around us?
Right, bigger picture.
And then God keeps them. And so then what happens? So he's at the 450 to 1 odds, which is just, right where you want to be.
And it's just, so it's 300 ragtag dudes.
Yeah.
Like they're not even like, they're not soldiers.
From the wine press.
Right. With the leader from the bottom of the wine press.
That literally reminds me of like the Sandlot.
This
is the Sandlot.
This is the Sandlot.
Yeah. Okay.
The beast. Right. So and you got to remember the Midianites are a formidable force. They're not just like
they were camel fighting.
They knew camel warfare. They were dominant. So we see there's 300 men and they're not like military men. They're just like regular dudes. And then God says, by the way, you're not going into war with swords. You're going in with a torch, a trumpet, and a clay jar. So, like, they're not even going in with, like, ARs and, like, 50 cal Barrett sniper rifles. Like, they didn't have that. It was a different time. But, like, didn't even go in with swords or, like, bows and arrows or whatever. Nah, so, like.
I'm sure they're like, okay, so I can get one if I crash it with a clay pot.
Right.
If I play the trumpet real bad, maybe busting my eardrums. Like, trying to figure out how that's going to work. Man. Light someone on fire, and then I'm done. I've got 3 people. Yeah.
And so this is just crazy, but God shows up. And the reason that God did all of that, and he told Gideon this, he said, if you were to go into battle with the 32,000 or the 10,000, if you'd have gone into battle with them, you'd have wanted the glory, like you did it. But if you go in with 300 with no weapons, I'm going to get the glory.
Right.
And ultimately, that's what our life perspective should be, that of all the things that we accomplish. So right now, with our church growing like it's growing, the things that we're doing right now, we're kind of on a mountaintop of this journey, right? So we know that there's mountaintops and there's valleys in life. You're either on a mountaintop, you're going up a mountaintop, or you're coming down. So we're kind of on the incline right now. And so we see some really positive things happening. But there's going to be a point in our life where we're going to head down in the valley. And what I love about that is, we heard we heard this message about people that were at Mount Everest. Remember that?
Hiking a base camp.
Hiking a base camp. They said at the mountaintop, it was beautiful, but nothing grows up there.
Yeah.
It's in the valley that things grow. And this seemed like a valley moment for Gideon. Like, all right, God, you're going to have to do something. And God's perspective always is, in those valley seasons, are you still going to give me glory?
Right.
You can give me glory in the mountaintop, and that's fantastic, but are you going to still give me glory in the valley?
When I think it's like what Paul says, like, in our weakness, Christ is made strong. Like, there has to be weakness in order to see the power of God.
Right. That's exactly right.
And when we're strong, it's in our own power. It's not going to be of God. It's not going to be that spiritual strength. Yeah. And so in that weakness that they had as an army, as a leadership, it's like that's when Christ is about to get glorified.
Right. And for successful people, they have the tendency of saying, look what I built.
Absolutely.
And I think the perspective shift that has to happen is that we have to be able to say, don't look at what I've built, look at what God did.
Absolutely.
Because it gives God back the glory that was ultimately his. He gave us the abilities, he gave us the gifts, the finances, he's provided all of that. So therefore we can't take responsibility. At night they broke the glass, they sounded the trumpets, and then the Midianites just killed themselves. They just started fighting themselves.
Insane.
I love that.
The best.
There's so much of that I love. The Israelites didn't have to do a thing.
Yeah.
They just blew the trumpet. They crashed.
Talk about not being able to take credit.
Exactly. They didn't do a thing, but the Midianites took. So God handled that situation. Yeah. And I think we see the insecurity of Gideon. We see all the things that he went through. We saw the perspective he had of himself, but he said, God, I will trust you to do what only you can do. And I think that's such a beautiful picture. So I want to talk just a little bit about like how we can apply that, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So how do we apply that to everyday life?
We're all in our own, wine
Gideon
press, you
moments,
could say.
right?
We have our
own insecurities.
The bottom of the barrel kind of issues, and we're struggling and need help and dealing with insecurities.
Yep.
So what do we do when that happens?
Yeah.
you
So I
know?
think the first thing that we do, we have to understand that the cure for our insecurity is found in identifying our true identity, and
Yeah.
like finding. I should say that, just say finding our true identity.
Right.
And the reason that's important is because when you know who you are, it doesn't matter who you aren't.
Exactly.
So like, but like, think about it. With insecurity, it's focusing on all the negative things about us. It's focusing on all the negative things maybe somebody said about us.
Well, that's something, shout out to our freedom courses that we're going to be launching church-wide. But one of the things that you go through are words and
Yeah.
the power of words, and
Right.
words that are spoken over you by others, words that you've spoken over yourself. Just like Gideon said, like, well,
Mm-hmm.
I'm nobody. I'm the lowest of the low. I'm scared. I'm hiding. And we have to replace those words, give those to God, and replace them with his truth.
Right.
And so that's what we find when we're talking about finding identity.
Because because all of our insecurities are going to speak things over us, what people, or our insecurities are what other people spoken over
Right.
us. The way that we find our true identity is understanding not what we believe about ourselves, but understanding what God says about us.
Right. The truth.
The thing that he believes about us. And so there's a couple of things that we know for a fact we can find in scripture that God has said about
Right.
us. Number one, he said we are chosen.
Yeah.
And we find that in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 4. It says, even before he made the world, God loved us and chose us in Christ to be holy, without fault in his eyes.
So good.
How beautiful of a picture is that?
Yeah.
Like all the things we believe about ourselves, all the negative things we believe about ourselves. But God's word says that Christ sees us to be holy and without fault from his perspective.
Yeah.
He sees us perfect. And it's not because of anything we've done, it's because of what Jesus did on the cross.
Yeah.
We're made clean because of the sacrifice that Jesus made. That was the perfect sacrifice.
Right.
So we can operate in that. And so we're chosen. We're chosen by God. Our identity is found in him. The second thing we see is that we're called.
Yeah.
That God's called us according to his purpose in Deuteronomy 28:10. I love the way that there was a couple of other called verses. I like this one for a reason, and you'll probably understand because you know me.
Yes, I do.
Deuteronomy 28:10 says, then all the peoples of the earth will see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they will fear you.
That's a lot. Yeah.
Oh, that's not a lot.
You like it.
That is right up my alley. People will fear me because I'm called by the Lord. And I don't mean like literally fear me. What I mean is people will be afraid of the success that God will bring for us, but it's not because of anything we do. It's because of who God has called us to be.
And it's like the power that he's given us
Exactly.
kind of can catch someone off guard or
Yeah.
or scare them in a way of like, wow, how could they possibly have this power?
Right.
And it's because it's a supernatural power.
That's exactly right. It's
So
not
it's
in our own
natural.
ability. Right.
Right. Not
It's
natural.
nothing that
It's-
we produce. It's produced by the power of the Holy Spirit.
And when people see stuff that's supernatural, it can be terrifying.
Yes, it
sometimes.
can. And I plan to terrify as many people as I can.
Bring it on.
Bring it. I'm
What
just kidding.
else?
I'm usually not that scary. The third thing is that we have to believe that we're loved.
Yeah.
We're loved.
I think a lot of people, that's actually one of the hardest ones.
It is.
Even though, you think about this is the creator talking about his creation.
Mm-hmm.
And like what more love than we see from God sending his son
Right.
and all these different
What's
things.
John 3:16?
Exactly.
Right? For God loved the
And-
world so much.
It's while we were still sinners.
Right.
Not because of anything we did,
Mm-hmm.
literally just because of who we were, who we are, because we are created in the image of God. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us.
Yeah.
Not that part.
While
just
we
for
had
me.
our back turned on him, he still died for
chose.
us. Like that's
That's
yeah.
the ultimate love. Because
Right.
man, if you asked me, would you die for someone that didn't like you?
Well, like I told the church,
It's gonna be a
I
negative.
told the church in service, I said, I don't understand that. Here's why. Like, obviously our kids, they're awesome. I would never sacrifice, like I love everybody. I don't know which camera I'm going to look at for this one. I love everybody who's listening right now, but there is not a person who's listening right now that I would sacrifice my kids to save.
No, not that kind of
I
love.
love you. I love you and I'll do anything to help you. But you better believe it. If it comes down between you and one of my kids, bye, Felicia.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I hate to be that like
No, that's the
direct
human
about it,
side,
but that's
though,
the
for
human
sure.
side. That's why I don't understand why God would send his
Yeah.
only son. I don't get it. That's hard for people. It's hard for people to grasp.
But if you think about it in that context, and then you hear you're loved,
Yeah.
it's like, I guess I am.
Yeah.
He was willing to send his son.
And it's not
for
that he
me.
would. He did.
Already.
He already did
Yeah.
it. And so, man, to grasp that concept is such
good.
a freeing thing.
Yeah.
It helps you really understand your identity. And the fourth thing is this, is that we are equipped. That the
Yeah.
things that God shows us, the things that the purpose that we're called to do, he's equipped us to be able to do it. Judges 6:14. It's the same scripture we just read just a little bit ago with Gideon. He's the angel of the Lord's talking to him. He says, and the Lord turned to him and said, go with the strength you have and rescue the Midianites. I am sending you.
Right.
He is sending us with the things that we need. You think Gideon had everything he needed to be able to do what God was calling him to do? Probably not. But God provided those things. Yeah. And as long as we trust in God to provide those things, as long as we're staying in God's will, he's got it covered. Everything we have is going to be okay as long as we stay under God's will. So you have to understand that the way that we cure insecurity is by understanding our true identity. Right. And the number two thing is that we have to be careful of comparison, because comparison kills contentment.
Yeah. I think that is one of the hardest things that people deal with right now. And I think part of it, I mean, everyone deals with this, obviously, but I think we have such access to comparison right now that maybe we didn't have early on, like, to date ourselves. We did not grow up with the internet.
Right.
Or smartphones. Jacob and I, when we were first married and had no money at all we could afford, everyone had cell phones. So you had to have a cell phone.
And there were iPhones around.
There were iPhones, 100% there were iPhones, but we couldn't afford an iPhone.
Right.
So we had the $10 a month plans with a flip phone that actually clicked when you opened it, kind of like Saved by the Bell style.
I think I still have one.
We have one at home, and the kids were like, what is this? And it opens and it goes click. And then you can type, and you had to, if you wanted to see, it was like, And so this whole social media age is relatively new, but for some people, they've, they really have jumped full force into it. And social media obviously is just a tool. Right. It's not a negative or a positive. It's how you use it. Right. But one of the biggest negatives is if you use it and allow it to have a comparison being
because part of it. Like all the influencers right now, they make their money off of
influencing you.
They make their money off of creating a perspective of themselves that is unattainable for most people, which forces us to try to strive for that. Like that's the design of being an influencer. Right. And we have to fight that. We have to fight not even just an influencer, maybe your neighbor. Your neighbor, you see a neighbor post, I got a new boat. Like, oh man, I want a boat. But then you make decisions to get you that boat, and it puts you even further in debt, or it forces you to make wrong decisions, or it definitely makes you not content with what God's given you. And comparison just kills that contentment. Yeah. So comparison kills contentment. Yeah. In fact, Beth Moore says it this way. She says, nothing will kill what you've been called to do faster than comparing yourself to other people. That is so true. So true. I mean, and I think in ministry, you see it a lot. It's very, very hard. I know we've had personal examples of that. But it's very hard not to look at what other people are doing and what God's called them to do. Right. And say, well, God, why isn't my thing going that way? Or, that is a personal one right there. Now, that was a shot across the bow. Yeah. That hit me straight in the chest. Yeah. I definitely have had to, I really am committed to protecting my peace. Yeah. And to protecting 100% my mind, taking every thought captive and remembering what I'm called to do. And so sometimes that looks like unfollowing. Yeah. And it's not because of the person, it's because of me. Exactly.
And so it's saying, no, God, I need to be able to focus on what you've called me to do.
Yeah.
And so that may look like removing a temptation to compare myself to someone else.
Right. Man, that's so good. And you know, just making sure that you're being healthy about things, making sure that you're putting the right things in place it takes a lot of awareness.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of awareness to go, okay, these are the things that trigger me. This forces me to want to think differently. No, man, if you're content.
I mean, you can feel it.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
Like, if you see something, especially like, you know, using social media as our example, like if you scroll and see something and there's this like little like, oh, like, or like this, oh, I wish, if you have that first initial thought, that is your sign. Don't ignore it. That's the Holy Spirit using that to say, okay, what is here that's in me that's not of God?
So good.
And I use that on a daily.
Oh, yeah. Multiple times a day.
Because it's about me. It's about my relationship with God. It has nothing to do with the person posting.
And your purpose and our purpose. What God, if we know what God's calling us to do and we've identified our purpose and we know our direction, then things like that just derail you.
And you know, they cause us to look at insecurities.
Yeah.
They're like, well, why didn't God let me do that?
Yeah.
Why didn't this work? And it just starts to we lose sight of who God's called us to be.
Right.
And we start looking at, you know, we start really embracing these insecurities that we're never supposed to do.
That's exactly right.
So
that's exactly right. Man, that's so good. So comparison kills contentment.
Yeah, for sure.
And when you're not content, you take your focus off of other things. And really what your focus should be is what God's calling you to accomplish, the purpose that's inside of you. And, you know, we saw Gideon and, you know, he was comparing himself to his family, comparing himself. But at the end of the day, he had to have bravery to get out of that wine press. And
he had to say yes.
He did. He had to say yes. But a lot of times that bravery comes in order to be that brave, you have to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Bravery takes vulnerability.
Yeah.
And it took Gideon to go, okay, God, I might think I'm the lowest in all of this, but ultimately I'm gonna submit to your will. And I think one of the reasons that we struggle with insecurity is because we resist vulnerability.
Oh yeah. I mean, who wants to be vulnerable?
Yeah.
We in my small group talk about it all the time. Like, I get the vulnerability sweats.
Yeah.
Like, that is a real life thing. You've heard it here first.
That's gross.
It's real. Let me reiterate. Real life, it is so nerve-wracking to be vulnerable, even with people you're close with. And some people maybe have an easier time, so this is just me putting it out there. But it is so, it is something you can practice and you can get better at, because I used to be real bad, and now I'm a tad bit better.
Yeah.
But I still get the vulnerability sweats.
Yeah.
But I always know it's worth it.
Yeah.
Because the vulnerability just puts me in a better position to depend on God.
Right. And vulnerability is something that is kind of a buzzword right now.
Yeah.
But it's the reason it's a buzzword is because healthy people know that when they're vulnerable, it opens up the opportunity for other people to be able to speak in to the things that we're dealing with, because sometimes we just need a different perspective.
Definitely.
Like, I don't think I see myself clearly all the time. In fact, I don't think I see myself clearly most of the time.
I would agree with that. Oh, is that not?
That was a little bit quick.
I'm sorry.
A little bit quick.
Are you opening up for me?
Feeling vulnerable right now, and you just kind of stamped on it.
I think you are chosen and you're loved. And sometimes you don't see yourself clearly, and I would love to help you.
Yes, you
that.
would. Yeah, but whether I'm vulnerable or not, you tend to tell me what I need to work on. But with vulnerability, it opens you up for other people to be able to see the perspective, to open up your perspective for other people to help you get better.
Definitely.
Right? And that's what vulnerability does, and that takes bravery. Like if you want to be brave, you got to be vulnerable. And so I'll even say it this way. Your level of insecurity is probably determined by your level of vulnerability.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
The more vulnerable you are, the less insecure you are.
Yeah.
And the less vulnerable you are, the more insecure you are.
And I think people don't always associate it that way because they don't understand how insecurity can present itself.
Right.
So you don't always think, you think, oh, well, if they're insecure, they're hiding in a corner. No, that's
Right.
not always how it looks.
No.
So what are some examples?
So some people who are insecure, they lash out.
So this to me is like the fight instinct.
Yeah, like fight or flight, or
I don't know that, let me be vulnerable for a minute. Not really. This is
sweating?
just everyone. No, I'm not, because everyone already knows this. I am a fighter to the death.
no
Camel warfare, you could say.
No, not you.
So, but yeah, I think the lashing out is like you're gonna fight, and but sometimes it's coming from a place of insecurity for
right.
sure.
Well, in the people that lash out, it's usually because they feel small about themselves.
Yeah, for
so
sure.
if they can cut you down,
They are insecure, so they have to make you
if
smaller.
they can cut you down, it makes you
Yeah.
smaller, so it makes you get on their level. Another one is to recluse. You kind of mentioned it.
So,
they
fight or flight.
isolate,
Yeah,
right?
isolate.
Another one is to mask it using humor,
Yeah.
right? So like that's one that I fell into, where I was real insecure about a lot of things. So I'll tell you my insecurity, and I'm this vulnerable moment, which you already know this, but this is, I guess we're going public with it. Yay. But so like I have a fear of not being liked.
Yeah.
Like that was a big insecurity of mine. I just wanted people to like me
And understand you.
and understand me. It kind of comes from
Yeah.
that. And so I realized at a young age that if I can get people to laugh, their walls come down, and they'll let me in, right? Let me into their group, or let me into
Yeah.
their situation.
So
So
true.
so that's how I was able to fight off that, or I was able to use that insecurity. And humor is not what society would consider to be like
Yeah.
that's a positive thing, right? You
Yeah.
make people laugh, but it's the motivation behind it.
Yeah.
If I'm just trying to make people laugh, I know, I listen to a lot of comedians, and a lot of comedians, when they're honest, they say, I'm one of the saddest people that you know. The way that
Or like have dysfunctional childhoods
Exactly,
and all this,
yeah.
and that's where it comes from.
so I learned that. And so
you have like socially acceptable
Right,
dysfunctions,
right.
and then like unacceptable dysfunctions.
So they can, so insecurities can present themselves in a number of different
Absolutely.
ways. But and this will be the last thing that we talk about with when it comes to this, the fourth thing that I wanted to mention. But when it comes to your insecurities, if God didn't give it, then we don't have to keep it.
So good.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like God didn't give us insecurities.
Yeah.
It's just stuff that we learned over the years.
It's like baggage we've picked up.
Exactly. We don't have to keep that.
Yeah.
Like we can give it back to God and say, God, this is what I've developed over these years. I'm giving this to you now. I want you to hold this. I want you
Yeah.
to heal this. And that takes vulnerability. It takes not comparing ourselves to people. It takes bravery. It takes all of these things, and seeking the right help, right?
Yeah.
Because if God didn't give us the insecurity, what did he give us? Well, 2 Timothy 1:7 says, for God has not given us a spirit of fear or timidity, but of power, of love, and self-discipline.
Love it.
That's what God promises for us. Those are the things that he gives us. So if God didn't give us these insecurities, we don't have to pick them up.
Right.
Or we don't have to keep them.
Yeah. I just picture like somebody hunched over carrying all this huge
Mm-hmm.
load of things that they've picked up over the years.
Yeah.
And then it's like the verse that says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
Right.
And all you have to do is lay it down.
Cast your cares upon the Lord because he cares for
Yeah.
us. Like,
Don't carry it. He's telling you can take his
Yeah.
burden. It's light.
yep.
He'll carry the rest.
And that's so good. Well, thank you, babe. Thank you for coming sit down with me and talking
I know
about
I didn't
the
get to be the
message.
first person on the
Well-
relaunch, but I will gladly give that honor to Pastor Eric. But I
Yeah.
am glad to be the second,
I'm glad you're here. We're going to do this a whole bunch more.
the first local.
The first local. There you go.
It basically still won
There you go.
gold medal.
Love you.
Love you.
Thank you again for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's conversation, tap like and subscribe on your device and whatever streaming service you're listening on so you don't miss out on our upcoming content. One of our values here at the Community Church is to be fearless in our faith. So please share this episode with someone. If you want to know more about who we are and how to get connected into what God is doing at the Community Church, click on the link in the description of this episode. Finally, we'd love for you to come and join us and to be a part of our spiritual family for our Sunday morning services at 1000 Parkview Drive here in New Iberia. 8:15 a.m. is our serve team rally. At 8:30 a.m., We have pre-service prayer, and corporate worship begins at 9 a.m. and again at 11 a.m. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.